This is a correction to a plot and some numbers in some of my earlier videos and articles on the weekly pneumonia and influenza death numbers. So these are numbers put out by the Centers for Disease Control, supposedly derived from the National Center for Health Statistics, the number of people who die from pneumonia and influenza each week. And so this is the corrected plot here. What I'm doing is comparing the number of deaths in each week of this year, of 2020 to 2019. So the horizontal axis is the week of the year, so for each year. And so 50, 51, and 52 refers to the last 3 weeks of the preceding year. So for 2020, 1 through 13 would be week 1 through week 13 of 2020. Week 50 through 52 would be weeks 50 through 52 of 2019. And in 2019, a year ago, which is what the red bars refer to, 1 through 13 would be weeks 1 through 13 of 2019, and 50 through 52 would be the ending 3 weeks of 2018. The vertical axis is the weekly deaths in thousands. And you can see they're very similar, and there's actually a significant excess in the previous year. And so there's actually really absolutely no sign of the COVID-19 pandemic before March 14th of 2020. And there's a small rise that's really consistent with the fluctuations in the measurements in the weeks between March 14th and March 28th. And in fact, there were reportedly 1,600 COVID-19 deaths as of March 28th, 2020. And this excess is 1,841. Now this is a smaller effect than in the previous plots that I put up because of a mistake that I made. So I'm going to explain the mistake and do some further discussion of what this means. It doesn't change the fundamental conclusions at all, but it makes the effect smaller, which means it is less. Let's just say it makes the effect smaller. So so let's go on and go here. Again, this is the plot. The updated plot is from a LibreOffice spreadsheet, which can be downloaded at the link below. LibreOffice is a free open source alternative to Microsoft Office. It's available for Microsoft Windows, Mac OS X, and most flavors of Unix. It can be downloaded here. This is the actual spreadsheet, so you can download the spreadsheet and actually look at it yourself and see what's going on. Let me know if you find any additional errors. I've tried really hard not to, but I'm obviously not perfect and don't claim to be. The original data is from this file on the CDC website, so this is an archive of these weekly numbers. If you find that the numbers in the file don't match the spreadsheet, please let me know, because I have copies of the comma-separated values files I downloaded, and I'd like to compare them. I would not be completely surprised if these numbers change, even in these archived files. I made a mistake copying the column of pneumonia and influenza deaths from early 2019, weeks 1 through 13 of 2019, and weeks 50 through 52 of 2020, with LibreOffice Calc. That's the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet copied the macros in the cells instead of the number values. These macros were then applied to the columns to the left of the copied column, giving incorrect values that exaggerated the excess of deaths in comparable weeks last year, 2019. The actual excess, as I said, is 1,841 more deaths in 2019, not the 6,000 in the previous videos and articles. So I was using the spreadsheet to make the results more accessible to a general audience, and the copying error was consistent with the results from the more in-depth Python data analysis. In retrospect, I should have checked the spreadsheet numbers more carefully. I just didn't even consider that it would copy the macros and do this funny thing. So what does this mean? It doesn't change the conclusion that there is no sign of COVID-19 in the numbers until March 14th, 2020, and a weak rise consistent with normal fluctuations in the weekly numbers in the final 2 weeks, March 14th to March 28th, weeks 12 and 13. It does reduce the size of the discrepancy between the 2 years. It remains possible that all of the about 1,600 COVID-19 deaths reported as of March 28th, 2020 could be conventional pneumonia and influenza death labeled as COVID-19 due to false positive RT-PCR tests and other misdiagnoses. So one of the problems here is the shelter in place and the big panic starts in mid-March, so around March 14th. So that means there are huge changes in the medical system. There's aggressive treatment of people who are diagnosed with coronavirus. There's a lot of stuff going on, which could actually cause large changes. So we know now that they are now reporting thousands of excess pneumonia and influenza deaths in, like April. And I'll put some new videos out about that, articles about that in the future. But that's after this very large change in our entire lifestyle, and everything has changed. And so if we're overreacting, for example, to this, then we could actually be causing the deaths, for example. So I don't believe. What I want to say is I have no knowledge of that, and it requires a lot of deeper drilling into things, and is beyond even my technical capabilities. So anyway, let's keep going. As I've discussed, there are strong reasons to doubt the CDC numbers. The most egregious I have found so far is the remarkable difference between the about 55,000 deaths from influenza and pneumonia in the leading causes of death tables, Table B, page 6. So if you follow the link here, you can see in fact, let me just click here. I hope that's not going to screw this up, but I want to show what I'm talking about. So it's linked to the National Vital Statistics Reports, Volume 68, Number 9, and this is the final data for 2017, and actually came out last year. And if you go down to page 6, you'll find a table. And in that table is the 8th leading cause of death, which is called influenza and pneumonia, which you might think is the same as pneumonia and influenza, but apparently not. And the total number of deaths is actually specifically 55,672 in 2017. So it's a mystery where this number came from. I mean, I do have a plausible theory, but that's one thing. If you look at these files, you'll see that there's about 188,000 deaths from pneumonia and influenza in these weekly numbers. So the weekly numbers typically have something in the range of 3 to maybe 7,000 deaths each week from pneumonia and influenza, which works out in a 52-week year to be, something in excess of 150,000. Usually something more like this. An educated guess is that the 55,000 deaths from influenza and pneumonia is the output of a model that the CDC uses to estimate the number of deaths directly or indirectly caused by, quote, influenza viruses, unquote. In the weekly pneumonia and influenza death numbers, the vast majority of deaths are listed as pneumonia, not the separate influenza category. Thus, about 130,000 deaths appear to have been assigned to other categories in the final deaths for 2017 report, possibly chronic lower respiratory diseases, which is the 4th leading cause of death. This is, however, theory, and CDC should carefully clarify what they're doing. Accordingly, it's difficult to know what preprocessing or modeling or estimation may have been applied to the weekly pneumonia and influenza death numbers. Although the commentary on the CDC website implies these numbers are counts of death certificates and the causes of death on death certificates reported to the CDC by state and local authorities. And I'm now looking at these files more to see if I can determine how complete they are by looking at how they change from week to week. The FluView webpage, which you can get to here, contains a table that seems to imply that all weeks except the very last week in the file are complete or almost complete. They use the label greater than 100%, where the angle bracket is presumably greater than. Of course, 100% usually means complete. So unless you paid a lot of attention, if you're a layman, a general public, there's a good chance you would interpret this table to indicate that the numbers are complete or almost complete or something. It sounds like complete, greater than 100%, except for the very last week. However, first of all, greater than is not typical scientific practice. What does that really mean? And secondly, a little weird disclaimer pops up here when you put your mouse over this question mark next to percent complete. So at best, I think it's misleading language. It's hard to understand what they're doing here. I believe it's likely from various sources that they have a model based on past years when there wasn't a crisis, which says we should receive, let's say, 4,000 death certificates this week, and we received more than 4,000 death certificates, so that's greater than 100%. That's, of course, meaningless. It doesn't tell you anything. But again, it's not absolutely unclear from the language here, and most people coming to the website would probably just interpret it to be percent, be fully complete, even though greater than is kind of weird. So let's go back to talking about this absence of any evidence of the COVID-19, the coronavirus deaths in January and February and early March. So there are many possible reasons for this not showing up in the weekly pneumonia and influenza death numbers before March 14th, 2020, despite the fact that China had some sort of cover-up in December and early January. The U.S. testing fiasco, where we didn't take the test the World Health Organization recommended. We made our own. It didn't work right. That cost us many months. We still don't have very good testing, which makes it hard to track the disease. There have been 430,000 visitors to the United States from China since this coronavirus surfaced. A lot of people have come here. There are very close ties, in fact, between China and Santa Clara County, where I live, but very, very, very few deaths in Santa Clara County. And the many asymptomatic carriers now being detected. Now, actually, this was reported by the Chinese in January or February at the very latest, early February, and it's the norm with diseases. Normally, a lot of people don't even get sick. They get infected, their immune system overcomes the disease, and they don't even die. And that's happened with very deadly diseases like the Black Death in Europe in the 14th century and many other famous horrific plagues that killed large numbers of people. It's not unusual, and so you'd expect people to be running around who you can't really detect by any means other than maybe some molecular biology test. Now, there are different reasons why the COVID-19 deaths might not be showing up, and these different possible reasons have different, even opposite in some cases, implications for public health policy. I think I want to emphasize that, so I'll repeat this. The different possible reasons have different, even opposite in some cases, implications for public health policy. So the possible reasons include, despite the many problems above, the public health authorities have been remarkably successful in identifying nearly all COVID-19 deaths up to March 14th, 2020. This seems too good to be true, but cannot be excluded. The infection fatality rate, also known as the actual mortality rate of the COVID-19 coronavirus, is much less than early numbers such as 3.4% from the World Health Organization or the 0.9 or 1% used by various authorities like the Imperial College model in England and Tony Fauci, whatever his formal title is. Iceland, South Korean, Denmark data, and German data suggest about 0.5% mortality, which could still be higher than the real rate. So there's no completely randomized population sampling that I can find that would tell you the actual infection fatality rate or mortality rate. But some of these, like the Iceland data, involve volunteers and sort of semi-random testing, so they probably have a more accurate picture of the asymptomatic people, for example. Many COVID-19 deaths could have be due to aggressive treatment of the disease, especially intubation, which is quite dangerous, rather than the disease alone. The weekly pneumonia and influenza death numbers are substantially incomplete due to normal delays or due to unusual delays associated with the crisis. There has been a compensating drop in non-COVID pneumonia and influenza deaths due to shelter-in-place and taking it easy. Elderly and susceptible persons may have taken precautions in January and February due to the publicity, even before the shutdown in mid-March, so they're being more careful so they don't just get, or if they do get, they don't die from normal pneumonia and influenza diseases. It could be something else I haven't thought of. It could be some combination of some or all of the above. In conclusion, there's a remarkable lack of key measurements in the current coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. These include the actual mortality rate, also known as the infection fatality rate, broken down by age, sex, race, pre-existing medical conditions, ambient temperature, sunlight levels, pollution levels, and other risk factors. The false positive and false negative rates of the tests for the disease, both the tests for an active infection, such as the RT-PCR tests, and tests for past infections, such as the antibody tests. So we need to know how accurate they are. It's far from clear that we do. The methods and rates of transmission for the disease. Aerosol transmission probably occurs at least at a low level. It's virtually unstoppable. So you have to wear a spacesuit 24/7 to avoid it. It is important to collect this data and measure these key parameters as quickly as possible in an open, transparent manner with multiple independent teams, not all funded or controlled by the CDC, as soon as possible to make good decisions based on knowledge and data rather than fear, ignorance, and the primal fight or flight response. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email or on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, and big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and improving results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page. Scan the QR code in the lower right corner to get the Patreon link. Our Patreon link is also in the show notes below.